If you want to understand American Jews, and especially kind of the American Jewish leadership, I think one interesting institution to look at is the 92nd Street Y. It has really sat at the intersection of kind of Jewish influence in New York City and also the kind of broader cultural, intellectual, political world, a kind of symbol of Jewish influence and even power in New York City, one of the most important Jewish cultural institutions in the United States. And so every year, the 92nd Street Y has a speech that they ask someone to deliver on the state of world Jewry. It's almost like the president gives a State of the Union address, and the 92nd Street Y has a State of the Jews speech. And I think it's an interesting thing to look at in terms of understanding the mindset, especially of people who have influence in the organized American Jewish community. So last year, the speech was given by Barry Weiss. This year, it was given by Dan Senor. And I listened to the speech, and I think it's really revealing about the kind of mentality, particularly of people who have power in the American Jewish establishment, because the 92nd Street Y is the kind of institution that convenes those people who have power in the Jewish establishment. Dan Senior himself is someone who has a lot of influence with those people and institutions. And I don't say any of this to be critical of Dan Senor as a person. In general, I try as best I can in my writing and in these podcasts not to attack people as individuals. I actually have known Dan Senor over the years. I think he's actually a very nice person, one-on-one. And I think he's actually a very talented person. I mean, his political perspective is very, very deeply opposed to mine. But, if you listen to the speech, you see he's a good public speaker. And I think he's good at framing his thoughts. And he's deeply, deeply, I think, connected to a particular view of Israel and a particular view of American Jews. And it's a very, very influential one. And so I think it's worth looking at it to try to understand how people in power in American Jewry are responding to this moment. So two things about Sinor's speech, which is about the state of world Jewry. It doesn't mention the word Donald Trump, right? It doesn't mention the word Donald Trump. And it doesn't mention, as far as I could tell, the word Palestinian, right? Neither of those words are mentioned, right? There's a tremendous amount of discussion of anti-Semitism, and there's a tremendous amount of discussion of October 7th, but there's no discussion of Trump, and there's no discussion of Palestinians separate from Hamas and October 7th, right? So what can we see from this, right? That it's as if you were saying that when thinking about the role, the moral obligations, the perspective of Jews today, that the question of the serious threat to the existence of liberal democracy in the United States, as represented by Donald Trump, is irrelevant, is not important, should not be on the agenda for how Jews think about their role in the United States and globally today. That's really an extraordinary thing. I would say it's an extraordinary moral abdication, right? To think about the state of Jews in the world today and not to think about how we are impacted and what our moral responsibilities are in the face of the gravest threat to American liberal democracy, perhaps since the Civil War, right? But I think it is, in this way, Senor's speech is representative of the way America's most powerful Jewish institutions operate, which is to say, if you look at AIPAC, but not just AIPAC, other Jewish organizations, the influential establishment, the Federation, the Anti-Defamation League, American Jewish Committee, they might quibble around the edges with certain things that Trump does about the United States, but they don't see part of their mission as to fight against Trump's authoritarianism. It's simply not part of their basic mission. Their mission is primarily about defending Israel and fighting anti-Semitism, which they define in large part as criticism and delegitimization of Israel, right? So this is the first thing. I think historians would look back at this and think that given the history of American Jews, there is something remarkable about the fact that the most powerful American Jewish institutions, and Senior is someone who's very much embedded in that world, don't see any sense of Jewish moral obligation in fighting to defend American liberal democracy in its moment of grave peril. The second, as I mentioned, is that the word Palestinian doesn't feature, right? So we are in a moment in which Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have both in different ways said that they think Israel is committing genocide. I think a growing, larger and larger consensus of people who study genocide, including people like Omer Bartov, the renowned Holocaust historian, have said this is genocide. but the fate of the Palestinian people, the suffering, the humanity of the Palestinian people is simply not a topic of discussion at all, right? Is again that this is not something that Jews in the United States and beyond should think about as an important subject in terms of how we think about ourselves and what our moral obligations are. I think that's quite extraordinary and profoundly disturbing. It's not even as if Senor spends a lot of time trying to explain why he thinks what Israel is doing in Gaza is morally okay, why, why it's not genocide or why people aren't starving to death, right? It's simply just off the table, right? Palestinians aren't mentioned. The only thing that's mentioned is Hamas and this as is kind of representative of this threat to Jews. But Palestinian humanity is completely absent from a discussion of what it means to be a Jew in the world today. And then again, I'm not saying this to be critical of Senor himself. I think he is representative of a broader perspective that you see in an institution like the 92nd Street Y, which almost never platforms Palestinians, or American Jewish institutions like AIPAC and ADL and AJC, which don't engage with Palestinian humanity. Again, it's just not part of their mission statement, right? They make statements about Hamas, they make statements about Hezbollah and Iran, and they make statement about pro-Palestinian solidarity, protests, almost always through the vein of these as anti-Semitic or supposedly anti-Semitic, but Palestinian humanity is just not a subject. So American liberal democracy and the existence of Palestinians, right? Palestinian humanity, Palestinian rights, Palestinian freedom, Palestinian dignity are just not subjects of conversation. And the third thing I think is interesting about Senor's talk is that one of his main arguments is that American Jews have invested too much of their resources in the broader public culture, right? And have not gotten enough from that. As he would say, basically, American Jews gave so much to so many of these institutions, but these institutions turned against Jews, in his view, because they became hotbeds of anti-Semitism as he sees it. And so he argues that American Jews should kind of turn inward and invest in their own institutions. Now, as it happens, some of the institutions that he thinks American Jews should invest in for a kind of Jewish renewal, like Jewish day schools and Jewish camps and Jewish adult education, are actually things that I also think are very important. I think Jewish education, developing experiences of Jewish joy, of Jewish fascination, engagement with Jewish texts are really, really precious things. But for Senor, these things are very, very much interlinked with the notion of reviving Jewish nationalism and girding young American Jews in particular to be able to battle for Israel in these larger institutions, in the culture more generally, but also that to kind of suggest that because American Jews have been betrayed by the supposed tsunami of left-wing pro-Palestine anti-Semitism, they should feel released from their obligations to support universities and other public institutions because those institutions have betrayed them, and they should focus inward instead. And again, I think if you think about this alongside the not mentioning Trump whatsoever, I think this represents another extraordinary abdication, right? American liberal civil society, independent institutions that are centers of potential dissidence and not under the control of the state are under very severe attack in unprecedented ways, whether they're universities or non-governmental organizations or law firms or independent media, right? And in the face of this, not only in this kind of marquee speech about how American Jews should think about ourselves and Jews in general, not only is there no call for American Jews to fight for liberal democracy, but the call, in fact, is for American Jews to basically turn away from their larger obligations to the broader society and the broader institutions, because those are defined as kind of as not caring about Jews and anti-Semitic, and so Jews should really focus more on their own sense. To me, if you put all of this together, it is really a call for Jews to think entirely outside of a perspective in which we have moral obligations to other people with whom we are in proximity, either the other Americans with whom we share a state, and who will be very, very endangered if this state becomes an authoritarian state, and in Israel-Palestine towards Palestinians who are the people who share the state of Israel with the state of with Israeli Jews. And this is not coming again from someone who I think is a fringe figure, and not someone who is a crude figure. Someone I actually think in some ways is one of the most articulate and eloquent spokespeople in American Jewish public culture for this particular perspective. And I think he makes the case as well as you can make it, right? It's a very well developed, it's a very well organized, well delivered speech. But the message, I think, is really a revealing one if one thinks about how the American Jewish establishment is meeting this moment of what I see as profound moral crisis, and I think suggests an American Jewish establishment that basically takes no responsibility for the moral crisis that exists either vis-a-vis Palestinians or within the United States itself.